Welcome to Awaken Sovereignty, a solo cast on ascension, shadow work, empowerment, and alignment with your highest purpose. I'm Chris Pinckley, spiritual coach and guide for those moving through deep awakening, transformation, and personal evolution. Let's begin. In this episode, I'm going to discuss the light and dark sides of manifestation. This is another loaded topic. I don't imagine anything that I talk about won't be loaded, because there's so much convolution of materials, teachers, information, people who say they know, people who do know, people who don't know what they're talking about. It's so convoluted. But there are legitimate light and dark sides to manifestation. Starting off with, the empowerment aspect of manifestation. Manifestation, the idea of it is very empowering. The idea that you can create whatever you want using your thoughts and emotions and intentions, aligned with action. Manifestation by itself is empowering. And when somebody who has previously felt disempowered discovers the law of attraction and manifestation, I'm sort of lump summing them in together now a little bit, but discovers manifestation, then it can be life-changing for them, because they can go from a place of feeling like nothing is working to feeling like everything is possible. And sometimes that by itself can make the needed shift in a person's life. And so I want to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and, highlight some positives of, the idea and concept of manifesting and manifestation. It's legitimate and it's real in its positive forms. However, in the negative, it can be quite toxic. Somebody can get stuck in what I refer to as a manifestation loop, where they keep trying to visualize and manifest something that they don't really believe is possible because it's too much of a stretch. And they can spend all their time trying to manifest and not taking any action, and it can spiral out of control. I've heard people say about certain law of attraction manifestation teachers that that person ruined my life. Now, you can take that with a grain of salt, because nobody's responsible for somebody else's life. But if you're sitting in a position of power as a teacher with, an audience of millions, you do have a certain responsibility. It's each of our individual responsibilities to, take ownership for our reality, right? Of course, sure, yeah. But teachers also have a certain amount of ownership as well, because people are impressionable. And if you have a large audience, people might subconsciously assume you know what you're talking about and acquiesce to your belief system and start utilizing it, and potentially to their detriment. If they either A, don't know what really don't understand how to use it, or B, your teachings are not, holistic, they're leaving out important aspects, then you could destroy people's lives, and karmically, you may take some ownership for that. Another dark side is, it kind of came about. Let's be honest. The Secret was awesome. I loved it. I watched it. I rented that darn thing 3 times, which means that, you had to pay for each time you streamed it back then. And it was like $4.99. So I ended up spending $15 on that thing. However, there was a dark side to it, and it left a lot of people kind of, sort of wanting what they're supposed to do with their lives. How do you really manifest? A lot of people became disgruntled, in the subsequent year, like the post Secret era. A lot of people became very disgruntled because they were unable to manifest anything in their lives or create things the way all these, superhero, self-help gurus were. Some people were able to utilize the teachings, and some people not. But one of the things that kind of came out of that was a little bit of toxic positivity. And I remember the first time that I really, I'm really not trying to single out The Secret, because I thought it was a brilliant movie. It was a brilliant job. It's just not fully holistic. But that said, I remember the first time that I really started to cue in on how toxic it could be, toxic positivity, when I had back when I was personal training some decades ago, and I had a client who was battling a little bit of cancer, And her sister had watched, watched The Secret and was becoming more and more of a kind of a law of attraction, fanatic, which by itself is fine. But she started telling my client, just be positive and you'll be fine. You can heal yourself. Just be positive. And essentially being completely dismissive to the suffering my client was going through, the anxiety and the fear. Having not had to deal with that herself, she was happy to project that onto my client. We'll just say my client's name is Amy. And we'll say her sister and Amy. And she was happy to project that onto Amy and just sort of walk away like she had done something amazing for Amy. Oh, you're healed because I told you this thing, that I watched this thing on The Secret. Now you're healed. You're good. Which was just absolute garbage. I mean, and I saw a lot of this kind of go on where people became so neurotically attached to their positivity that they started to almost implode because they couldn't allow themselves to have a single negative thought. To further exacerbate the problems, we're in a time of vibrational acceleration ascension, which is designed by a mechanism of solar radiation to push all emotional density to the surface to be released. Now, if you combine their neurotic desire to stay positive all the time with a time period of vibrational acceleration meant to push emotional density to the surface to be expressed and released, you have a recipe for absolute disaster. This means that people will inadvertently potentially cause harm to themselves when they're supposed to be releasing suppressed emotion, sobbing it out, raging it out, shaking out with fear, getting it out of the body. But instead they're suppressing it and pushing it down. Then it's going to remanifest as some sort of illness or in the body or adversity in their lives. It's got to manifest somehow. It's getting pushed to the surface. So it just became very problematic. And it also made me a little bit, I started to wonder, about the timing of it all. During a time when people really need to surrender and allow themselves to feel deeply into all their emotional hurts and wounds in order to purify themselves, we're being given a teaching that says to do the opposite at all costs. And people people would just become so neurotic and obsessed with it and just so fearful of every single negative thought. It started to merely make me raise an eyebrow, because there is an empowering, a highly empowering aspect of manifestation and specifically the law of attraction. But it doesn't do you any good if you are suppressing, if you're repressing suppressed emotional karmic density that's trying to surface for integration. Then you're creating this internal conflict within yourself, instead of ultimate healing and a spontaneous remanifestation of your reality at a higher vibration. You're creating this insane turmoil in the name of trying to maintain positivity at all costs. And it really is at all costs. It's a big cost. That's the cost of your sanity. That's the cost of your emotional freedom. And more importantly, it's the cost of potentially heart activation and a whole new reality for you, which is the end goal of this time period, is heart activation and bringing yourself online, where you will have a spontaneous remanifestation of your entire reality at the new higher octave at unconditional love. So is it good to be positive? Absolutely. Is it good to open your heart and feel love and gratitude for everything? Absolutely. Is it good to suppress fear and grief and sadness if it's trying to express itself? No, that's terrible for you. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. I mean, I went back and forth on it for years. There's so many people that will say during this time period that you're supposed to vibrate high and feel love and joy at all costs. But I've seen it right before my eyes where somebody allowed themselves to process their emotional density and they popped into their higher self right before my eyes. I have multiple people in my circle that have completed the work, and now they received heart activation and they're online and their lives are completely different. Ultimately, you need to follow your own intuition about this. Even aside from my podcast here and my expertise, take what resonates and leave the rest is always a good mantra, when it comes to a good guideline, when it comes to listening to anybody, myself included. And follow your own intuition. Your intuition, if you really get in touch with your intuition, which ironically, and paradoxically perhaps becomes stronger the more you do the integration work and you release suppressed emotion, right? But the more you follow your intuition, the better off you're going to be anyway. So you take little bits of these types of podcasts and teachings and stuff, and you start to build an overall picture, and follow your intuition, and do what works for you. But just understand that when it comes to manifestation and the law of attraction, there's a light side and a dark side. And you want to make sure that you're not inadvertently stalling yourself out or causing yourself harm by suppressing emotion that needs to be expressed and integrated, in lieu of trying to maintain positivity at all costs. Because if there is suppressed emotion within you and it's trying to surface for expression and you repress it, there's a high degree of likelihood that you're going to manifest some other form of adversity for yourself, whether a physical illness or external problem that will be representative of that same suppressed emotion. You join me in another episode when I go over how the quickest and most efficient way to integrate suppressed emotions, which is the technique I refer to as emotional integration. But I'll cover that in another episode. For now, I think that'll do it. Take good care, and we will talk to you soon. If this episode resonated with what you're moving through, and you're interested in private spiritual coaching around awakening, emotional integration, shadow work, relationships, boundaries, or building a soul-led life and business, email me directly at rc101coaching@gmail.com with the word coaching in the subject line. You can also find the contact link in the show notes. Follow Awaken Sovereignty for future episodes and share this with someone moving through their own awakening. This is Chris Pinckley. Stay awake, stay aligned, stay sovereign.